For my final project, I decided to pick the Vietnam War, and I decided to interview my grandmother. And she did not fight in this war, but she lived through it. And a lot of other people that I talked to said they were going to interview war veterans. And I wanted my project to be something different from everybody else's, so I wanted to interview a normal person living through this time in history. My research prior to interviewing my grandmother was I just Googled the facts about the Vietnam War, and I just wanted to catch up on what I should know about the questions to ask her, because it's been about 2 years since world history, and I wanted to know what I was talking about when I interviewed her. My expectations for this interview were not very high because I did not expect my grandmother to know specific facts like she did. I knew that she'd have a general understanding of this war, seeing as though she had to live through it, but some of the stuff she said was very good, and I liked the things she said and the facts she gave me. And I think the interview made me feel closer to her because she was able to share memories and the history back from this war, and I loved getting her perspective on this historical event. I also think she enjoyed me taking time, well, not taking time, but doing something with her for school that would benefit me, and her being able to help me and giving her company and somebody to talk to. But overall, I was very pleased with the answers that she gave me, and it was really special learning from her and seeing what she had to say about this time in history. Like I said, my grandmother did not fight in this war. She was just your average, everyday civilian, and I wanted a different perspective than the battlefield of war. And I know that the soldiers had to go and endure way more hardships, and it was just difficult for them, I know, but it was also difficult for people back home because they had family, loved ones, whatever over there, and they didn't know if they were okay when they were coming home. And to me, that's really scary. And she was able to tell about lives back in America, how this war was when she was all through school, her elementary school, middle school, high school, and even during college. And that's a really long time for a war to be going on. So I was surprised by that. And she was able to give me accurate details and that confirmed my prior research. So I was happy that we were doing the interview right. I know that my interview was not as long as others that I talked to, but I felt like we answered the questions with good answers. And one of the questions, one of her answers that really surprised me was when she talked about how this war affected the economy and how it was hard for soldiers to find jobs when they came home. And that just surprised me because today we have programs set in place to help those who come home from fighting the war to find a job and help with their financial situations. And she said they got none of that when they came home. They had to fend for themselves, and they really had to depend on family to help them get through this difficult time. And another reason I decided to pick this war was because my grandfather, her husband, fought in this war, and they had not met before he had gone off. They met when he came home. And one interesting thing that she told me was that he never really talked about war with her. And she said that normally people who have been in a war fall into two categories. Ones who talk about their experiences of war all the time, and the others who never talk about it unless they're with other soldiers. And that's when he shared his experiences, and that makes logical sense to me because some people just don't want to go through the gory and terrible details and stories and remember all that negative stuff they had to go through. But I feel like it would help them to talk with someone else who had to go through the hardships they had to face and compare stories and contrast stories, because some were having different jobs and stuff as others. And I would have loved to hear some of his stories, but he unfortunately passed away before I really got to ask him questions about his time in the war, because I didn't really understand when I was little. I mean, I knew that he was in it, but I didn't know that I should ask him questions about it for future things like this project. I feel like I gained new knowledge about not just the Vietnam War, but my grandmother and how this historical event changed her life and her family's life and her friends' life and people around here, because she's lived here all her life. And it was interesting to me to hear that just because it's happening way over there in Vietnam, it affected people in Little Lexington. And I loved hearing her stories about everything and getting her perspective. And I would definitely recommend this project to someone in the future, because you can understand a part of history from someone who has lived through it, whether it be someone who fought in a war or like my grandmother who did not fight in a war but still affected her lives. You can, I mean, a textbook's not going to tell you specific stories like they can. So to me, I think this project is very beneficial and I enjoyed it very much.